What if the woman you saved was hiding a deadly secret? Obie lived in a small village with his wife, Ada. He was a hunter, spending his days in the thick forests that surrounded their home. Ada was a quiet, hard-working woman, tending to the small garden in their backyard and managing their modest hut. Their lives were simple, but peaceful. They had little, but they were content. Can you guess what darkness was about to enter their lives? One evening, while Obie was deep in the forest hunting, he found a woman lying on the ground. She was covered in dirt, her clothes torn, and she looked as though she had been wandering for days. Without thinking twice, Obie lifted her and carried her back home. When Obie brought the woman into their home, Ada's heart sank. She couldn't hide her discomfort. The woman, whose name was Bissy, had a strange presence about her. Ada couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, but Obie insisted that Bissy was lost and needed their help. Ada kept quiet, but deep down, she didn't trust the stranger who now lay in their home. The next day, as the sun rose over the village, Obie prepared to go hunting. He grabbed his bow and arrows and turned to Ada, telling her he would return before night. Ada, her mind still uneasy, asked if she could go with him. She didn't want to be left alone with Bissy, but Obie assured her there was nothing to fear. He told her to stay home and rest, promising to be back soon. Reluctantly, Ada watched her husband leave, disappearing into the forest. She was left alone with Bissy, whose presence made the air in their home feel heavy. Ada tried to distract herself by tending to her garden in the backyard, but the thoughts of what she had seen the night before plagued her mind. She had seen something in Bissy's room, something unnatural, something that should not be. What terrifying truth was Ada about to uncover? Stay tuned with Innocent Stories to find out. As Ada knelt in the garden, pulling weeds from the small patch of vegetables, she felt a chill run down her spine. She could sense someone watching her. Slowly, she turned around, and there stood Bissy, her dark eyes fixed on Ada. Bissy's expression was cold, her face emotionless, but her eyes burned with a strange intensity. She stepped forward, her movements slow and deliberate. Ada's heart began to race. She knew what she had seen last night, Bissy's true form, her body transforming into a snake. Ada had been too afraid to speak of it, but now the truth stood before her. Bissy spoke, her voice low and filled with malice. "You should have minded your business. You saw what you weren't supposed to see, and now I won't spare you." Ada's blood ran cold. She tried to move, to run, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. Bissy's body began to change. Her legs twisted together, growing longer, transforming into the massive, scaly form of a serpent. Her eyes glowed yellow, her mouth widened into a sinister smile, and her skin shimmered as the transformation completed. Before Ada could scream, Bissy lunged forward. The giant snake coiled around her, squeezing her body with unimaginable strength. Ada struggled, gasping for breath, but the more she fought, the tighter the snake's grip became. Ada's vision blurred, her strength fading with each passing moment. Her body grew limp in the snake's grasp, and with one final squeeze, Bissy ended her life. After the dark deed, Bissy slithered away from the scene, her serpent form gone, and left the house as though nothing had happened. Bissy walked into the village market, her face calm and composed, as if her hands were clean. She smiled at the vendors, exchanged greetings with the women buying and selling food, blending into the crowd as though she had not just killed Ada in cold blood. Her disguise was flawless, no one suspected anything unusual about her. She wandered from stall to stall, pretending to be just another villager going about her day. Meanwhile, back in the forest, Obie was focused on his hunt when a strange feeling washed over him. It was as if the wind had whispered to him that something was terribly wrong. His heart raced, and a chill crept up his spine. It wasn't a normal feeling. He had spent years in the forest, trusting his instincts, and this time, they were screaming at him to go home. Without hesitating, Obie abandoned his hunt and hurried back to the village. His feet moved quickly, but the sense of dread grew with each step. By the time he reached his home, he was out of breath, but there was no relief waiting for him. The house was quiet, too quiet. There was no sign of Bissy or Ada. Panic set in as Obie rushed inside, calling for his wife. No answer. He searched every room, but the house was empty. His heart pounded in his chest as he stepped into the backyard. There, in the garden, he found Ada. She lay motionless on the ground, her body lifeless, her skin pale. Obie dropped to his knees, shaking her, hoping she was still alive, but her body was cold. His hands trembled as he looked at her, unable to understand what had happened. Desperate to save her, Obie scooped Ada's body into his arms and ran as fast as he could to the village healer. The healer was an elderly man who had treated the village for many years, known for his wisdom and knowledge of both natural and spiritual remedies. Obie laid Ada down, begging the healer to save her. The healer examined Ada carefully, his face growing more serious with every moment. He finally looked up at Obie, shaking his head slowly. He explained that it was too late. Ada was already gone. She had been bitten by a dangerous snake, and the venom had spread through her body, killing her. Obie was stunned. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The village had never had a problem with snakes. In fact, snakes were rare in their area. People didn't die from snake bites, and to make it worse, nobody had ever seen a snake as deadly as this one. The healer, too, was puzzled, saying he had never encountered such a thing before. Something about it felt unnatural, like there was more to this than just an unfortunate accident. Devastated, Obie returned home. His heart was heavy with grief, and his mind was filled with questions. As he approached the house, he saw Bissy sitting on the porch, tears streaming down her face. She was crying as if she had just learned terrible news. Obie, still reeling from what he had just discovered, looked at Bissy in confusion. He hadn't told anyone about Ada's death yet, and Bissy wasn't even home when he found her. He hadn't said a word. How could she possibly know? Obie asked Bissy why she was crying. Through her sobs, Bissy replied that she was mourning Ada's death. This took Obie by surprise. He stared at her, his mind racing. How did she know? He hadn't told anyone yet, and he was certain Bissy had been at the market when he came home. He asked her how she found out. Bissy quickly lied, saying that she had heard the news from the women at the market. They had supposedly told her about Ada's death while she was shopping. But something about her story didn't sit right with Obie. He looked at her closely, his mind replaying the events of the day. Bissy had left the house before he discovered Ada's body. She couldn't have possibly known what had happened before he did. The more he thought about it, the stranger it seemed. Obie's suspicion grew as he stared at Bissy. How could the market women know about Ada's death if it had just happened? No one else had seen Ada's body except him. The healer was the only other person who knew, and he hadn't told anyone yet either. As Bissy continued to cry, something about her tears felt false. Obie's mind began to connect the dots. He remembered the strange feeling he had that morning in the forest, the unusual signs that something was wrong, and now here was Bissy, already knowing about his wife's death before anyone else. The pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. A few days later, the time came to bury Ada. Obie gathered a small group of family members and close friends to say their final goodbyes, but not everyone came. Many of the villagers, including some of Obie's own family, had warned him about Bissy when he first brought her home. They had told him that something about her wasn't right, that there was a darkness surrounding her, but Obie had brushed off their concerns. He had believed that Bissy was just a lost woman in need of help, and he hadn't wanted to listen to anyone else. Now, many of those who had warned him refused to attend the burial. They were angry with him. They felt that he had ignored their advice, and now Ada had paid the price. Some whispered behind his back, saying that if only Obie had listened, his wife would still be alive. Others didn't even bother to whisper, their cold stares and absence at the burial said more than words ever could. The burial was a small, somber affair. The air was thick with sorrow, and the few people who did attend stood in silence as Obie lowered Ada's body into the ground. His heart was heavy with grief. After the burial of his wife, Ada, Obie tried to return to his normal life, but things had changed. His heart was still heavy with sorrow, and the empty space Ada left behind was impossible to ignore. Yet, in the middle of his grief, something else began to stir. Bissy, who had remained in his home, started to get closer to him. At first, Obie tried to keep his distance. He was still mourning Ada and couldn't imagine falling in love again so soon. But Bissy was always there, offering comfort, speaking softly, and telling him things he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. She began to tell him that she loved him, that she was the one who truly cared for him, and that Ada's death had been fate. At first, Obie resisted her words. How could he love someone so soon after losing his wife? But Bissy was persistent. She cooked for him, took care of the house, and made herself a part of his daily life. Slowly, Obie's heart began to soften toward her. He told himself that maybe he deserved to be happy again, and before long, Obie found himself madly in love with Bissy. The more time Obie spent with Bissy, the more his life seemed to improve. His hunting trips to the forest became more successful. Where once he would come back with just a few animals, now he returned with his hands full of game. Deer, antelope, and wild boar all seemed to come to him with ease. Obie would take the animals to the village market and sell them, making a lot of money. It wasn't long before he became one of the wealthiest men in the village. His hut was now filled with the spoils of his success, and the villagers began to take notice. People who had once cursed Obie for bringing Bissy into the village, who had refused to attend Ada's burial, now came to him with open hands. They came asking for help, for loans, and for favors. At first, Obie didn't know what to do. He still remembered how they had turned their backs on him when he needed them most. But he also knew the struggles of living in the village. He was tempted to help them, to show them that he was not the man they thought he was. But Bissy, who had grown even closer to Obie, warned him against it. She told him never to give his money to anyone. She whispered in his ear that those people had not cared about him when Ada died, that they had mocked him behind his back. Now that he had wealth, they only wanted to take advantage of him. Bissy's words were like poison, slowly seeping into Obie's thoughts. She convinced him that no one in the village was truly his friend, that they only wanted what he had worked so hard to earn. Obie listened to her. Each time someone came to his door asking for a loan or a favor, he turned them away. At first, it felt strange to refuse, but soon it became easier. Obie had Bissy by his side, and she made him believe that they didn't need anyone else. Together, they had all the wealth and happiness they could ever want. The villagers began to grumble, some whispering that Obie had changed, that the strange woman he lived with had turned him into a different man. But Obie didn't care. He was richer than he had ever been, and for the first time in his life, he felt powerful. He had Bissy, who seemed to bring him nothing but good fortune, and he had more money than he knew what to do with. The warnings of the villagers, the suspicions they had about Bissy, all faded into the background. Obie was too blinded by his newfound love and success to see the dark shadow growing over his life. Whenever Obie prepared to go hunting in the mornings, something strange started to happen. Bissy would always stop him before he left, asking him to wait a few hours. At first, Obie didn't think much of it. She would tell him that he needed to be patient, that going too early wouldn't bring him the success he wanted. Then Bissy would go into her room, lock the door, and tell Obie never to come in, no matter what. Obie found it strange but didn't ask too many questions. He trusted Bissy and believed her when she said it was for his own good. Behind that locked door, Bissy would transform into a massive snake, her true form. She would slither out through a hidden hole in the wall, unnoticed by anyone. Once in the forest, she would head straight to the spot where Obie usually set his traps. There, she would use her powerful snake form to kill animals like deer, wild boar, and rabbits, making sure they fell into Obie's traps. Hours later, after completing her task, Bissy would return home and transform back into her human form. She would unlock the door and tell Obie it was time for him to go hunting. Obie, without knowing what had just happened, would grab his gear and head into the forest. When he reached his traps, he was always amazed at how full they were. Every time he went, there were more animals than the last trip. Deer caught in snares, rabbits tangled in nets, and wild boar stuck in pits, all ready for him to take home. At first, Obie didn't think much of it. He believed he was just having good luck, that maybe his skills as a hunter were improving. The more animals he caught, the more money he made at the market. People would rush to buy his fresh meat, and his wealth continued to grow. Soon, Obie was the richest man in the village, and people marveled at how quickly his fortunes had changed. But something strange was happening, and deep down, Obie knew it. In the past, hunting was difficult. Some days he would come home with nothing, and other days with just 1 or 2 animals. But now, every time he checked his traps, they were overflowing with game. It didn't make sense, but he didn't want to question it. All he cared about was the money he was making. The market women loved his meat, and he had more than enough to sell. Bissy, watching him from the shadows, smiled as her plan unfolded. She knew Obie was too blinded by his newfound success to see what was really happening. Each time he went hunting, Bissy made sure his traps were full before he even set foot in the forest, and as long as Obie didn't question how it was all happening, her secret was safe. The villagers continued to whisper about Obie's sudden wealth, but he ignored them. He told himself that hard work and skill had brought him success, and he didn't need anyone else's approval. One day, when Obie had gone out to the market, a nosy neighbor named Madhu came to Bissy's house. Madhu was known in the village for sticking his nose into other people's business, always asking questions and spreading gossip. This time, he came straight to Bissy with a look of suspicion on his face. He knocked on the door and waited, arms crossed, as Bissy opened it and stood quietly in the doorway. Without wasting time, Madhu began talking. He told Bissy that he knew who she really was. He claimed that the gods had revealed her true identity to him in a vision. He said that she wasn't an ordinary woman but a snake in disguise, a creature sent to the village with some dark purpose. Madhu didn't know yet what her mission was, but he warned her that the gods would not allow her to harm the village. His words were sharp, filled with accusations as he called her names and insulted her. He even said that it was no wonder strange things had been happening since she arrived. Bissy stood there silently, her face calm as Madhu's words poured out. She didn't respond, didn't argue, or defend herself. She simply watched him with cold, dark eyes, her expression unchanged. Madhu took her silence as proof that he was right. He puffed up with pride, thinking he had exposed her secret. After throwing a few more insults her way, Madhu left, stomping down the road, muttering to himself about how he would uncover her true plans soon. 2 days passed after Madhu's visit, and life in the village continued as usual. But then something unexpected happened. Madhu went to his farm, as he did every day, to check on his crops. The sun was high, and the air was hot and dry. As Madhu walked between the rows of his crops, inspecting his plants, he suddenly froze in his tracks. He froze in his tracks. There, right in front of him, a large snake appeared, coiled and ready to strike. Before he could move or cry out, the snake lunged forward and bit struck him on the leg. Madhu screamed in pain, stumbling backward and clutching his leg where the snake's fangs had sunk deep into his flesh. The venom spread quickly through his body, and within minutes, he collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. By the time some villagers heard his cries and rushed to help him, it was too late. Madhu was already dead. Word of Madhu's sudden death spread through the village like wildfire. People were shocked and afraid. Villagers were shocked and afraid. Snakes were not common in their village, and no snakes were rare in their area, and no one could remember the last time someone had been bitten, let alone killed, by one. The villagers gathered in small groups, gossiping about what had happened. Some whispered that people began to panic, thinking that something evil had come to their village. The strange events that had been happening ever since Obie brought Bissy to her home suddenly seemed connected. First, Ada had died from a snake bite, her sudden death, even though no snakes were known to live in their area village. Now, then Madhu, who had openly accused her Bissy of being a snake, was dead too, also killed by a snake in broad daylight. It was all too much for the villagers to ignore, and fear gripped their hearts. Rumors began to spread flying. Some people whispered that Bissy, they believed her must be a witch cursed, that she had brought bad luck and misfortune to their once peaceful village. Others thought, some even speculated, that the gods were angry and had sent snakes as a punishment for something the village had done. The villagers had had enough. They gathered together and decided to take their concerns to the king, they believed only the king could put an end to the strange things happening in their village. A group of elders, along with some of the most respected villagers, went to the palace to seek justice. When they arrived, they explained everything to the king: the sudden deaths, the strange rumors about Bissy, and the fear that had gripped the village. They pleaded with the king to do something about Bissy before it was too late. The king listened to their concerns and agreed that something needed to be done. He sent a messenger to summon Bissy to the palace. When Bissy arrived at the king's court, she appeared calm and graceful, as though none of the village's accusations bothered her. The king took one look at her and, to the surprise of everyone present, was immediately taken by her beauty and charm. He liked her instantly, and any plans to investigate the strange events in the village faded from his mind. The villagers, who had been hoping the king would question Bissy and get to the bottom of things, were shocked. Instead of confronting her or asking about the deaths, he welcomed her kindly and didn't seem to believe the rumors. He even praised her poise and composure, saying she didn't look like someone capable of such evil. Bissy left the palace unharmed, returning to Obie's house with no punishment or accusations. The villagers, frustrated and confused, returned home, unsure of what to do next. They had hoped the king would take action, but now it seemed like they were back where they started, with no answers and even more fear. Soon, Bissy began secretly visiting the king behind Obie's back. She would sneak out whenever Obie was away at the market or in the forest, going to the palace to see the king. The king had become even more enchanted by her since their first meeting, and their meetings became more frequent. Bissy was careful to keep it hidden from Obie, but secrets like that are hard to keep forever. One day, Obie heard whispers in the village. People were talking about how Bissy had been seen visiting the palace regularly. At first, he didn't want to believe it, but the rumors grew louder. Soon, even his friends were warning him that something wasn't right. Obie couldn't ignore it any longer. When he confronted Bissy, he asked her directly if what he had been hearing was true. Had she been seeing the king behind his back? Bissy, as usual, tried to deny it. She turned on the tears, claiming it was all lies spread by just more rumors from the villagers who hated her. But this time, Obie wasn't so easily convinced. For the first time, doubt crept into his mind, and he began to wonder if Bissy had been hiding more from him than he realized. They had a big fight that night. Throughout that entire month, something strange also happened in the forest. No matter how hard Obie tried, he went to hunt, he couldn't catch any animals in his traps. Every time he went hunting checked, the traps were empty. This had never happened before, and it made him even more suspicious. He started to wonder if there was a connection between Bissy and his hunting success. Could it be that she was somehow controlling the animals in the forest, filling his traps before, and now, because of their fight, she had stopped? The more Obie thought about it, the more it made sense. Ever since Bissy came to her life, entered his village, his fortunes had changed. He had turned into become rich, his traps filled with game overflowing with success, and villagers feared him. But now, after their argument, it was as if his luck had run out. No animals, no wealth, no success, nothing. It was all too strange to be a coincidence. One day, after weeks of tension, Obie apologized to Bissy, hoping to make things right. She forgave him, and just like that, the next time he went hunting, his traps came back were filled with game again. The forest seemed alive with animals, and Obie couldn't ignore the strange connection anymore. It was as if Bissy had the power to control his fate. The thought made him uneasy, but he kept it to himself, unsure of what to do. Meanwhile, in the palace, the queen had also heard the rumors about her marriage husband's affair with Bissy. It was no secret that the king had been acting strangely since Bissy started visiting. The queen confronted him about the king, demanding to know if she had been unfaithful with him. The rumors were true. She asked him directly if he had been seeing Bissy in secret. "Is it true?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The king, not wanting to admit the truth, denied everything. He told her, "The queen, there's nothing between me and Bissy. It's nothing, people, that there is nothing between them. These are just rumors spreading rumors to cause trouble." He insisted that Bissy was just a villager and there was no reason for her to worry about reason to. But the queen wasn't convinced. She had seen the way the king looked at her Bissy and knew there was more to the story than he was admitting. Despite the king's denial, the rumors continued to spread. The village was buzzing with gossip, and both Obie and the king were caught in the middle of it. Bissy's influence over both men was growing, and everyone could see it. The once peaceful village had now turned into become a land divided by suspicion, lies, and fear. One afternoon, the queen, unable to tolerate the rumors any longer, decided to visit Obie. She had heard enough whispers about Bissy's involvement with the king and knew she needed to confront the situation directly. Arriving at Obie's house, the queen spoke in a firm voice, demanding that Obie warn Bissy to stay away from her husband. "I'm tired of the rumors, tired of the lies, and I will not let Bissy ruin my marriage," she declared. Bissy, who had been nearby, overheard the conversation from the other room. She listened quietly as the queen issued her warning, a cold smile creeping across her face. She did not react or confront the queen at that moment, but in her mind, plans were already forming. She would not allow anyone, not even the queen, to stand in her way. A few days later, tragedy struck the palace. The queen, who had been healthy and strong, suddenly slumped to the ground while in her chambers. Her servants rushed to her side, but it was too late. She died quickly and without explanation. The village was shocked. Whispers filled the air once again, and many began to suspect that Bissy had something to do with the queen's sudden death, but no one dared to speak it aloud. A few weeks after the queen's death, the king gathered his closest advisors and kingsmen. In a surprising announcement, he declared that he planned to marry Bissy. The news sent shockwaves through the village. Everyone knew that the king had only recently lost his queen, and for him to marry so soon and to Bissy of all people was unthinkable. Yet, despite the surprise, no one dared to question the king's decision. His word was law, and no one had the courage to challenge him, not even his closest advisors. When Obie heard the news, he was filled with rage and confusion. He couldn't believe that Bissy, the woman he had brought into his home, was now set to marry the king. The thought of losing her to the king was unbearable, and so, filled with anger, he confronted her. He demanded answers, asking her, "How could you betray me like this?" Bissy, as always, remained calm. She told Obie not to worry, that everything was part of her plan. She asked him, "Aren't you interested in something greater, something more powerful than what you have now?" Obie, still angry but curious, asked her what she meant. She looked him in the eyes and asked, "Aren't you interested in becoming the king yourself one day?" Obie was surprised by the question. He said, "Yes, of course." The thought of being king had crossed his mind, but he didn't understand how that was even possible. Bissy smiled and told him to be patient, that soon he would understand. She assured him that everything was under control and that all he had to do was stay quiet and trust her. Though Obie still didn't fully understand what Bissy had in mind, her words stirred something inside him. The idea of becoming king, of having power and control, excited him. Bissy, meanwhile, was already planning her next move. She had woven herself deep into the lives of both Obie and the king, and now she was on the verge of achieving something far greater than either man could imagine. All she needed was time, and as long as Obie remained loyal to her, her plans would soon unfold. Obie, though still confused and filled with doubt, agreed to stay quiet. He didn't know exactly what Bissy was planning, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something big was coming, something that would change everything. Some of the villagers, unsettled by the sudden rise of Bissy and the strange things happening in the village, decided to seek help from the village priest. They were afraid of Bissy, but they knew that the village priest, with his wisdom and connection to the gods, might be able to shed light on who or what she really was. So, a group of them gathered their courage and made their way to the priest's shrine. When they arrived, the priest, an old man who had served the village for many years, welcomed them with a serious look on his face. He could sense their fear and worry. The villagers explained everything, the strange deaths, the gossip, and how Bissy was now going to marry the king. They begged the priest to use his powers to find out the truth about her and help them stop whatever evil she was bringing to their village. But to their shock, the priest's face darkened. He looked more fearful than they had ever seen him. He told them that he could not reveal anything about Bissy, not because he didn't know, but because even speaking about her would bring great danger. The priest trembled as he warned them that Bissy was no ordinary woman. She was far too powerful, and no one could stop her mission, not yet, at least. The villagers left the shrine feeling helpless. Even the priest, the man they thought could save them, was too afraid to do anything. Meanwhile, back in the village, the king went ahead with his plans and married Bissy. The ceremony was grand, with all the kingsmen and chiefs present. The village was filled with whispers, but no one dared speak out against the king's decision. Bissy, now queen, had secured her place in the palace, and her influence over the king only grew stronger. Obie watched all of this in silence. Though Bissy had told him to trust her, it still hurt to see the woman he once loved marry the king. As the days went by, he tried to keep a low profile, but not everyone in the village was so kind. One of Obie's neighbors, a man who had never liked him, came to his house just to mock him. The neighbor laughed at Obie, calling him a foolish man for allowing the king to take his woman right in front of him. He jeered at Obie, saying he should have been more careful instead of trusting someone like Bissy. Obie, filled with anger and shame, listened as the neighbor continued to insult him. The words stung, but deep down, Obie knew there was nothing he could do. He had chosen to believe in Bissy, and now everything was slipping out of his control. Even though Bissy had promised him something greater, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had lost everything. As the neighbor walked away, still laughing at him, Obie sat quietly, wondering if he had made the biggest mistake of his life. He couldn't help but think back to when things were simple, before Bissy came into his life. Now, everything had changed, and he wasn't sure if he was strong enough to face what was coming. Now that Bissy was queen, her power in the village grew even stronger. She wasted no time in making her influence known. One day, she sent for the very villagers who had gone to see the village priest. They came to the palace, trembling with fear, not knowing why they were called. When they arrived, Bissy didn't waste any words. She warned them to be careful and told them she knew exactly where they had gone and what they had asked the priest. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were cold and dangerous. The villagers were shocked. How did she know they had gone to the priest? None of them had spoken a word to anyone. Fear gripped their hearts as they realized just how powerful Bissy truly was. On their way home, they were silent, too scared to say anything. Once they were out of earshot, they made a vow. They swore never to speak of Bissy again, not to each other, not to anyone. From that day, they lived in fear, pretending everything was normal, but inside, they knew Bissy was watching. Meanwhile, Bissy continued her manipulation of the king. One evening, as they sat together in the royal chambers, she told the king that she had an idea. She suggested that Obie, her former husband, be made the head of the palace guards. She praised Obie's strength and loyalty, saying he would be perfect for the role. Under her spell, the king didn't argue. He agreed without hesitation, trusting Bissy's judgment completely. The news spread quickly through the village, and many people, especially the elders, were angry. They couldn't understand why the king would make such a decision, especially when they all knew about Bissy and Obie's past. It didn't sit well with them. The elders gathered and decided to approach the king. They wanted him to rethink his decision, to be cautious about putting Obie in such a powerful position. When the elders went to the palace and expressed their concerns, the king was furious. He stood up and warned them to mind their own business. He told them that he loved his wife, Bissy, and trusted her completely. He didn't care what anyone thought about Obie's appointment. The elders, shocked by the king's outburst, had no choice but to leave quietly. They were deeply troubled, but there was nothing they could do. The king was blinded by his love for Bissy, and no one dared to challenge him further. As time passed, it became clear to everyone that Bissy was the one pulling the strings in the palace. The king did whatever she asked without question, and the villagers grew more fearful of her by the day. The once peaceful village was now a place of whispers, secrets, and fear. No one dared cross Bissy, and those who had tried were either dead or too scared to speak. Obie, now the head of the guards, was unsure what to make of his new position. He knew that Bissy was behind it, but he still didn't fully understand her plans. All he could do was follow along, hoping that whatever she had promised him would one day come true. But deep down, a part of him still wondered if he was being led down a path he couldn't escape. One night, as Obie lay in his room, Bissy appeared at his door. Her eyes glowed with a strange light, and her voice was smooth and commanding. She told Obie to follow her to the king's bedroom. Confused, Obie asked why. Bissy smiled and told him that the king was not home, and this was his chance to be closer to her in ways that would bring him more power. "Don't you want to become king?" she whispered. Obie looked at her, his mind racing. She explained her plan: if he continued to sleep with her in the king's bed, the king would eventually become sick, and with time, he would die. The king had no children, so when he died, Bissy would marry Obie, making him the new king. Obie was excited by the thought of becoming king, a dream he had never imagined could be so close. He accepted Bissy's plan without hesitation. From that night on, whenever the king was away, Obie would sneak into the king's bedroom and sleep with Bissy. He believed her words, thinking that this was the path to greatness. Days turned into weeks, and soon enough, the king began to fall ill. The sickness seemed to come from nowhere, and the healers in the village were puzzled. No treatment seemed to work, and the king's condition worsened every day. The villagers, unaware feedback of what was happening behind palace walls, began to worry about the future of the kingdom. After months of suffering, a few months, the king passed away. The village mourned, but Bissy wasted no time. She quickly positioned herself as the one in power, declaring herself ruler since the king had left no heir. The villagers, though shocked by her boldness, were too afraid to speak against her. With the king gone, Bissy's grip on the village became stronger than ever. Obie was furious, curious however, was furious. This was not the plan. He had been promised that he would be king, but now it seemed that Bissy had no intention of following through. Anger and betrayal burned inside him. One night, he confronted Bissy. He demanded to know why she had gone back on her word. He wanted to be king, just as she had promised. Bissy, unfazed by his anger, looked at him with a cold smile. Without warning, her body began to change. Right before Obie's eyes, Bissy transformed into a massive snake, her scales glistening in the dim light. She slithered toward him menacingly, her eyes burning, glowing with a deadly light. Obie backed away in fear, his heart pounding in his chest. As quickly as she had transformed, Bissy shifted back into her human form. She stood before Obie, calm and powerful. "I am not just a woman," she said, her voice cold and sharp. "I am a demon sent to destroy the village. All the strange deaths, including your wife, Ada, were my doing. I am responsible for the chaos that has taken over the village." She warned him, "If you ever try to tell anyone what I have done or who I truly am, you will join your wife in the grave." Obie, shaking with fear, knew that Bissy was not making idle threats. He was frozen in fear, hardly able to move. Frozen in fear. He was trapped, powerless against her. From that moment on, Obie lived in constant fear. He could no longer see a way out. Bissy, now the ruler of the Queen village, had everything in her control. Her plans had unfolded perfectly, and there was nothing Obie could do to stop her. All he could do was live in silence, knowing that he had been used in her evil scheme. One day, not long after Bissy had taken full control of the village, a young man arrived at the palace gates. He was dressed simply, with a calm presence that suggested he had seen and understood much more than his age suggested. When he was allowed into the palace, he introduced himself as Prince Moses, the rightful heir to the throne. Bissy was shocked. She had always believed that the king would have no heirs, no children, that his line had ended with his death. But here, now stood a man claiming to be the king's son. Her half-effing mind raced as she tried to process the situation. The elders were immediately retrieved to the palace, and two of them, wise and old, confirmed that Prince Moses was indeed the son of a king. They explained that the former king had kept hidden his son's identity secret, because of the many enemies in the village who had long coveted the throne. By keeping him to protect son's existence a secret, he had hoped to shield him from harm. Bissy's face darkened with anger as she realized she had been outsmarted, the truth unraveled. She had worked so hard, manipulated, and schemed to kill her way into power, only to have it all threatened by a prince she had never even known existed. The elders, realizing they had deceived her, been fooled by Bissy's lies, immediately stripped her of her position. The village had their true king now, and Bissy was over, reign was over. Obie stood by, witnessing silently, watching everything unfold. He had no words, only a deep sense of dread. He had followed B's path, thinking it would lead him to power and glory, but now he saw nothing but disaster ahead. The elders made a swift decision. Obie and Bissy were to be sent away, banished from the palace forever. Many villagers, furious with all the chaos they had caused, demanded that Bissy and Obie be sent to the evil forest home, a cursed forest place where no one ever returned. It was a dark for its darkness, feared for its spirits and dangerous creatures that roamed freely. Banishment, there was a death sentence. The people wanted justice for all the deaths and strange happenings that had plagued the village since Bissy's arrival. But Prince Moses, now the rightful king, stood up and made his first royal decree. Despite everything that had happened, he showed mercy. Bissy and Obie will not be sent to the evil forest, he declared. They will be pardoned and simply cast out from the palace to live as commoners, with no power or influence. Though King Moses did not approve yet know the extent of Bissy's evil deeds, his kind heart guided him to spare their lives. The villagers grumbled, unhappy with the decision. They had wanted revenge, but they dared not question the new king. Bissy and Obie, stripped of everything, were let out of the palace. The grandeur, the power, and the wealth they had once enjoyed were gone. Now, they were nothing more than two outcasts, left to wander the village they had once ruled over. As they walked away from the palace gates, Bissy's eyes burned with rage. She had been defeated, for now, but deep down, she still harbored her dark powers. Obie, on the other hand, was consumed by regret. He had followed Bissy blindly, and now he had lost everything. The promises she had made to him were all lies, and he had been nothing but a pawn in her twisted game. The village, though relieved that their true king had returned, was still wary. They did not know what Bissy might do next, but for the moment, they were content to see her and Obie removed from the palace. One evening, while Bissy was out of the house, Obie decided it was time to make his escape. The fear and regret had grown too strong for him to ignore any longer. He quietly packed his few belongings, careful not to make a sound. He knew that if Bissy found out what he was doing, his life would be in danger. Once his things were gathered, Obie ran as fast as his legs could carry him, heading for his maternal village, which was far away. He had no plan other than to get as far away from Bissy as possible. All he wanted was to escape her grasp and start a new life, far from the dark path he had been led down. When Bissy returned home later that evening, she immediately noticed that something was wrong. The house felt empty. She searched the rooms and found that Obie was gone. Her rage boiled over. Obie, the one person she thought she could control, had abandoned her. Furious, she stormed out of the house and made her way straight to the palace. She wasn't going to let anyone take power from her, not even the prince. At the palace, Bissy attempted to use her usual charm and cunning. She tried to seduce Prince Moses, hoping to regain control by manipulating him as she had done with so many before. But the prince was not like the others. He saw through her lies and refused to give in to her. This rejection infuriated Bissy. She had never been denied what she wanted, and the fact that Moses stood firm only made her more determined to take action. In a fit of rage, Bissy reached into her bag and pulled out a small, sinister object, something filled with dark magic. She was about to use it against the new king, intending to destroy him and take back the throne by all means necessary. But before she could cast her evil spell, something powerful hit her from behind, as if the spirits themselves had intervened. Bissy fell to the ground, her body lifeless. The palace guards and the elders rushed to the scene, shocked by what had just happened. They realized that Bissy's evil deeds had finally caught up with her. The villagers, who had long feared Bissy, were relieved to hear that she was no longer a threat. Her body, filled with dark magic and wickedness, was taken to the evil forest. There, it was buried deep within the cursed land, where no one would dare go. The village elders made sure she was placed in the most desolate part of the forest, ensuring that her spirit would never return to haunt the village again. With Bissy gone, the village could finally breathe easy. King Moses ruled with wisdom and fairness, restoring peace and harmony to the land. The people no longer had to live in fear, and slowly, life returned to normal. The strange events that had taken place over the past years became stories that the villagers would pass down from generation to generation. This story, brought to you by Innocent Stories, teaches us that no matter how powerful or cunning someone may be, evil deeds will eventually lead to their downfall. Bissy's greed for power and her deceitful ways brought harm to many, but in the end, she could not escape the consequences of her actions. Obie, too, learned a hard lesson: following the wrong path, even when it seems promising, can lead to great regret and loss. It is important to choose wisely and to stay true to one's values, for the pursuit of power and wealth through wickedness will only bring ruin in the end. Dear viewers, if you enjoyed this gripping tale from Innocent Stories, please like, share, and subscribe. Don't forget to turn on notifications for more inspiring tales. Stay blessed, and thank you for your support.